But that was the intention, or the intent, I think, of his criticism of what is happening, and that is that the device of calling an amalgamation of councils, or the total abolition of one council and the absorption of that council's area and all of its assets and everything else into another council, can be just treated as a boundary change, is a contrived device which, as I have said before publicly, does not reflect well on those that conceived it as a tactic. It does not reflect well on those who have espoused it from within government, and it's not fooling anybody that that's what was intended by the Local Government Act as a way of changing council boundaries. The abolition, for example, to pick up on an example that's been used, the abolition of the city of South Perth so that its affairs can be, in effect, taken over by the town of Victoria Park, that is not a minor event for a local government. That is not a boundary change. And to pretend it is insulting to the intelligence and reflects very badly on those that are employing or supporting such a tactic. The irony is you don't have to do that, because the city of South Perth and the town of Vic Park have been working together for years in what is, for their elected members and staff, a risky operation to amalgamate naturally. But they know that there are benefits. They've identified longer-term benefits for the combined municipality. It will also help insulate the new entity against the intentions of avaricious people or local governments from north of the river. Always a risk of that happening, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. So why on earth upset the people in South Perth and Vic Park by saying, oh, well, we're going to use this silly tactic of calling it a boundary adjustment? Very ill-advised. You know, there's two things, we once described, there's two things in politics that are capital offences. One of them is saying things that aren't true. The other one is being stupid. And there's a couple of people in this town associated with these tactics who should be hung twice, because they're not playing with a straight bat, they're not peddling in the truth, and they're most certainly being stupid in the way they're going about it. Now, the intent of this motion, whether the words are perfectly crafted or not, is quite clear, that it's expressing a view about something. And it's not only about the matter I've just canvassed, it's about whether or not people have access to the so-called day door provisions, which we're all using as shorthand, for an opportunity for people in local governments that are prospectively to be a part of an amalgamation or boundary change to have a say in the outcome, subject to meeting certain conditions. Now, the provisions there are imperfect, and we can discuss those in detail if we need to on another occasion. But I recognise that those provisions are imperfect. I certainly wouldn't die in a ditch for them, but the principle's important. Why? Because at least it is some sort of safety net. A safety net against the government getting it wrong, horribly wrong. And in most cases, even if you've got people that manage to call on a poll to oppose something, because it's always the people that oppose things that call on these polls, they probably still wouldn't succeed. But it's important to have the safety net there so that if enough of the affected people can be roused, they can have some say in their own future. But that's not exactly how the way things are working at the moment. What we do have is a procedure in place whereby the Local Government Advisory Board is required to report on a whole range of submissions that have been given to it. We're told by leaked and other sources that there are a number of those submissions have been reported on. In fact, I think the Minister's office themselves have acknowledged that they have recommendations in relation to about 34 of the 38 submissions. That detail doesn't concern us, but we know that there's a lot of recommendations already at the Minister's desk. Recently, it was released by, I think it was the ABC News, radio and television, that there were certain recommendations that were on the desk of the Minister that some people in the town weren't going to be very happy about. And the report, which I've examined or sought to examine a little bit further with one or two people, insists that the government's preferred position in relation particularly to the future of the city of Perth and its boundaries is not as the government would want it to be. Now, we'll find out in due course what those recommendations are, but there does seem to be a significant prospect that the Burswood Peninsula will not be excised from the Vic Park area, which I'm very glad about because I've fought long and hard to stop that happening. And there's a range of other measures that affect the city of Perth and surrounding local governments that won't necessarily go the way the government might have liked. Now, we'll see about that when the recommendations are released. But that'll be a telling occasion because we will receive at the same time the government's response. We've been told all down the path that what happens is that there's a process here, and we know that. We've read it in the Act. And that the Local Government Advisory Board can make recommendations, or will make recommendations to the government, and the government has some options available to it on receipt of those applications. It can either accept it and implement it, or it can refuse it and do nothing. What it can't do is vary the recommendation to suit itself. So this will be an interesting test, won't it, for the government? If the advice it receives, the recommendations from the Local Government Advisory Board are not to its liking, will the government simply accept those recommendations, or will it want to dig its heels in and try another approach to get its way, despite the views and advice to the contrary? We'll see. But I'll tell you now, that is going to be a test for the government in view of their record so far about what's happened with this process of local government reform. Now, I want to touch